Chris, welcome to the show. It is wonderful to have you, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I know we've been talking about it for several months, and so glad we could put some time together. So everybody, Chris Rising, he can be found on Twitter at Chris Rising. I know you're very active out there. We'll get into your other handles later on IG and your podcast. We'll talk about that too. So Chris, the big question, the big white elephant in the room, of course, we have you on the show. You are a big landlord of office properties and other commercial properties, and everywhere I go, every networking group I'm in or real estate circle, the big question is what's going on with the office markets and what does it look like today? So I thought it'd be great to hear firsthand from you, from somebody that's very immersed in it here in Los Angeles and elsewhere. But if we could maybe give us a little perspective from the LA market, because a lot of our listeners are really based here in LA. And I'm curious to know what you're seeing now and what are the conversations like with the tenants?
Well, a lot in everything you asked me, but first of all, just pleased to be here. We talked about this several months ago, and I'm glad we got it together. And you and I have kind of been around LA real estate for longer than either of us want to admit, and we've seen the big boom from when my father and his partners, Rob McGuire and Jim Thomas, built some of the big office buildings, and then we've seen the tech wreck, and we've seen the great financial crisis. I will tell you that I've never seen anything like what we're seeing now as it relates to office. And I think it's several factors coming together, and it's hard for me, and I say this a lot, that, in my early 50s now, I'm kind of at that age where I look back of all the positive experiences I had and will sometimes assume that's how the experience is for everyone today, that they have these communal experiences around an office. And I think the reality is, number one, we don't have enough data to know where office is going to go because we're still in the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Number two, there's most certainly habits that have changed fundamentally because of technology, and we need to be very honest about that. And number three, we have a baby boomer workforce that is aging out, but quite frankly are still running things, who have one perspective, and you have a workforce made up of Gen Xers like myself, and who kind of understand where the boomers are coming from, but really want to be more like the millennials. And then you have the Gen Z entering. So you have three things happening. And I just say over and over again, Friday is a huge day for the county of Los Angeles because it's the day we don't have to wear masks indoors finally. And we're a couple of weeks behind the state of California. That's going to open some things up in a way that we hadn't seen before. I do fundamentally believe the fear factor of getting the virus has shut us down in a way that has been painful, beyond painful. Our retailers are hurting. When you look at the city of Los Angeles, especially downtown Los Angeles, the largest concentration of civic workers outside of Washington, D.C. are here in Los Angeles. And the government has told everybody, don't come back. And you think about how many people, Los Angeles has a daytime population pre-COVID of 500,000 people a day that are coming in to downtown. You take out the office piece, it just trickles down. And it's not just the homelessness, which is a horrible problem that we have been a total failure in dealing with. It's the homelessness problem that then also has increased crime with the fact that you don't have any people and downtown doesn't feel safe. And there are other parts of Los Angeles that have had to deal with the homelessness issue that I never thought would ever, Brentwood being one of them, but they didn't have the associated crime as much there. But there's examples of it, so I don't want to say no. So I think Los Angeles is dealing with the fact we just don't have people coming downtown like we usually do. It doesn't feel safe. It doesn't feel clean. As that starts to change, which I fundamentally believe it will, then we have to ask ourselves, what's the future of office? And boy, I think you have to break it down. These offices were built for a reason because people needed a place to go to have all their files, to have all their communications. We had a culture set up around all of these office buildings that were built that were basically the breadwinner, mostly male, comes downtown in the morning and stays a lot of times all the way through dinner. And that lifestyle doesn't exist anymore. You have I see a few files there, but those are probably things you can just throw in a bag. In the old days, we had walls of those kind of files there, and that was our vital information.
Yeah.
And when I say old days, I'm talking like 1995. It's not like I'm talking 1975. I mean, it's not that long ago where these habits of what we did, and those things are out the window now. And I wrote, when I first started blogging and stuff in the early 2000s, I wrote a lot about trying to become paperless, and a lot of pushback. Always have paperless. Well, I think if you had to talk to anybody who's a millennial or Gen Z, they're pretty much paperless. It doesn't mean they don't have a little notebook and stuff, but not compared to what we used to be. And I think that's what office is struggling with. Another thing office is struggling with, and I think this is going to be a real social problem. The most wealthy, the most educated are the ones saying, I'm not going to the office. I can tell you that we have not had a janitor miss work since it started. We have not had a security person miss, an engineer, a property manager. They've all been going to work through all this. If you go to a dentist's office, all those people have been going through this. Doctors' offices, teachers, cops. It's the most educated and the wealthiest people who said, "No, I don't need to be in an office." And I think that's gonna cause us some real social issues about how we deal with things. But also, I think there's going to be a swing back, because if you just look at, it's one thing if you're writing code all day. But if I have a lawyer tell me their role is very important because this is an apprenticeship business and a mentorship business and word crafting is so important, but yet they don't know their second and third year associates because they've only seen them on Zoom, I kind of put my hand up and go, well, maybe AI can do what you do. So there's some real issues. And but I think you have to, and I try to do this all the time, is I'm not going to make a strategic decision for our investment thesis on office as a 52-year-old white male. Just, we have to have better perspective. And when you look at it, though, there's some interesting things. The tech companies have all said, don't come in until March. And I've heard even, January of next year. But yet you look at the people who are gobbling up the most space, it's tech companies. Yeah. You look at here in Los Angeles, the techtainment companies, those are very much collaborative businesses that have kind of moved to, I have friends who are writers and all, and they do a lot on Zoom, but what they're doing more and more is we'll go take over a house and turn it into our collaborative space while this show is going on. So as those things are trickling back, well, then why would you do a house? Why not do an office building that meets all of your needs, a place to work out, a place to have nice meals, easy to come and go. So I don't know, I'm rambling a bit. I will tell you that we don't have a definitive answer. What we do see is the red states offices becoming more important. Texas is moving over 50% occupancy. We are finally getting from low 20s to about 35 or 40%. And I think Friday's a big day. I think Friday, where you don't have to use a mask inside if you're vaccinated, I think you're going to see people creeping back. But I do believe, something I do believe very fundamentally, if you're going to have an office, the onus has now changed to the employer creating the reasons for why you need to be there. In the past, I think the employees dictated it because they wanted FaceTime. Now they're saying, well, I can work without it. So what is the employer going to do to create that great camaraderie and culture? And I think you're going to see that then also be handed over to landlords and owners and saying, can you meet the needs of people who want to come at 10 o'clock in the morning and stay till 8 o'clock? Or, maybe half the workforce or maybe a third of the workforce comes in 2 days a week and then a third the other 2. And there's going to be, how can landlords meet those needs? And I also think you just have to be honest that there is probably 25% of the office stock in Southern California doesn't need to exist because it can't meet the broadband needs, the interactive needs. I mean, why would you sign a 5-year lease on 1,500 square feet somewhere today? And so that's just a reality. You either turn that into much more flexible use space or just realize that that's probably not a leasable space today because no one's going to make that long-term commitment over a small amount of space with all these options out there. So it's going to be painful. And I'll tell you, we are seeing life. We went almost a year with out of 3.5 million square feet in downtown with no tours. I mean, literally no leasing tours.
Wow.
That's all changing. That's all changing in 2022. A week ago, we were averaging 7 tours a week, and our kind of pre-COVID was somewhere between 10 and 14, 15 a week. And so it's creeping back up. We are seeing people being more willing to do longer term leases. And if you look at who the tenants are who are signing longer term leases right now in downtown Los Angeles, it's fashion, it's entertainment, these collaborative businesses. And I just think it's a matter of time before all the law firms and accounting firms bring everybody back in some form and just say, we got to have, we got to have something. I mean, I don't know if I can't imagine that everyone's life goal is to get out of college and at 22, go to an apartment and work there for the next 5 years. I mean, I just can't imagine that's a life aspiration for a lot of people, or especially young families. And I think it's probably been, as I said, this has been easiest on the wealthiest, older apprenticeship occupations, like the lawyers and the accountants who have a back house to work in, and not that bad for them,
right?
Unless they really care about mentoring. But then I think at some point they have to look at themselves and go, God, I have this. My whole retirement is selling my equity stake in my law firm, but I got a bunch of people who don't want to buy it, or they're just hired guns and they move from job to job. That doesn't work. And then you got a partnership in a law firm you can't sell. That's going to freak out a lot of senior partners, I think.
Yeah.
And so having that culture and that mentor and saying we got to be together, I think will be really important. But it's not going to be what the old days, where if you wanted to get something done, I mean, I can edit a whole offer. I can, a lease. I can do it all from my phone. I mean, it's amazing. Microsoft, the Word, and
so true.
Google. So I think you just can't say that office isn't fundamentally different, but I also don't think you can say definitively what its role is going to be. And we'll find that out over 2022, I believe.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that answer, Chris. You unloaded a lot there. And, so that was a great answer. I think it's very fluid from what I'm gathering right now. You guys are still figuring out, tenants are still figuring out, and there will be some sort of hybrid approach probably down the road, because I also believe that there's going to be some concept of the office as we know it, and it might not be the way it looked years ago, but that was interesting. So
one piece of the puzzle we didn't get into, I'm sorry to cut you off, but one piece of the puzzle we didn't get into, which I find fascinating, is there were so many cultural norms around the office, including around dress code, that are blowing up now.
Yeah.
And I don't have an answer, because when you can wear nice but tennis shoes basically, or Nikes, into a private club today, I mean, that's just different. Jeans, and I think those are things that also are going to have a taper down effect on the office market. Can you really put a dry cleaner in kind of your sundry shop kind of retail? Because will they have the demand? Do people really need to? It's not like the old days where you drop off 3 suits on Monday and pick them up and have them dry clean.
Right.
And so there's a lot of social dynamics that relate to retail that are being blown out of the water, and we just don't quite know how they're going to come back. I know we deal with in some of our buildings is, what do you do with that Uber Eats driver, or that because is it security now has to call up and have somebody come down? Do we deliver it? Because the fact is, for 2 years, people have really liked having their food delivered to them, and that transfers over to the office too. So, between dress code and social norms about how they eat and all that stuff, I think there's a lot to get figured out in the next year or so.
Oh my God, there's so much from, just like you said, cultural society changes, as well as safety and health perspective. So I would say, I mean, being an office landlord, you guys definitely have your hands full, and you're certainly in one of the most complex asset classes, I think, today of real estate. So luckily, you guys have a great team together. But Chris, you mentioned something a minute ago I wanted to get some more thoughts on. You mentioned that we have here in, say, the greater LA, millions and millions and millions of square feet of office space. And you said, I don't think it's LA can absorb all of the space back to traditional office, take the people, maybe the 1,500, 2,000 square feet. So how do you think, like in the next 5 years, 10 years, I know you don't have a crystal ball and it's just sort of your perspective, but how do you think that'll play out? Do you think they're going to change to condos, apartments? Do you think there'll be hotels? I mean, what do you think will happen with some of that, of the office landscape?
Yeah, I think the groundwork was laid after the '94 earthquake, where a lot of the stuff in the historic core was so disabled by the seismic issues that it wasn't until the city passed a workable adaptive reuse to encourage people to change something from a 1935 office into apartments that we had some real traction on all that. And so I think what you'll see is just an updating of the adaptive reuse for 70s and 80s buildings. I think Dr. Lee, of all of us who know Dr. Lee, is a pretty good example who owns a lot of office, and they're kind of taking the ones that they think convert better to residential, and they're converting it to residential. So I think you'll see a lot of that. I think some of it will just be obsolete and have to be torn down for a higher and better use. I think, we still haven't done that with all the stock pre-World War II. So I think you'll have some of it there. And then I do think one of the issues we're all going to deal with is, where you put that office so you can encourage people to come back. And it would seem to me that the whole infrastructure of our public transportation is in and around downtown LA. So I could also see people rehabbing dated office buildings into more modern office buildings to capture a tendency of people who would take normally wouldn't like public transportation, but they'll do it 2 or 3 days a week around their time schedule. And, downtown LA, as I think we all know, is equally inconvenient no matter where you live. So if you're going to put the center of a circle somewhere, downtown LA is the place to do it. I don't know how West LA, how that's all going to play out. But if you can run a business and be close to your home, obviously some big time businesses there. And if you don't need as much support staff who drive a long way, maybe West LA becomes a really, really prime market, because just the executives coming in, and you don't need what traditional secretary role and things like that. So I think West LA is probably pretty well positioned in all of this. And, downtown LA, its reason of existence is really the transportation and its central location. So, I think it's going to be a painful couple of years. I really do. It's been a painful couple of years already. I still, our whole system is designed that we can evict people who don't pay rent, and we can charge late fees to encourage people to pay rent. That's all been taken away from us as landlords, and we're still not quite sure when it comes back. So it's very hard for us to turn over space and make it exciting to people, because our hands are so tied on the commercial office side as well as the residential side because of all these COVID policies that have come in.
Wow, that's got to be a lot to deal with. So, Chris, with all this change happening in office and commercial real estate, what have you guys done with your company as a result of COVID over the last 18 months, specifically with Rising Realty Partners? What sort of changes have you made?
Well, it's been pretty dramatic. In March of 2020, I was in New York with my partner, Scott McMullen, and had all the documentation on a $750 million office-focused ESG fund. And we had been gearing, to be really focused on office. I had always wanted to get into industrial multifamily, but in this business, what you find is people like you to specialize a lot. And we have that background, even though we've owned a lot of industrial in my career and a lot of multifamily. But we hit March 7th, and that's where this company was headed of 2020. By March 21st, that fund was put on this shelf and probably will never come back. And we looked around and said, what are we going to do? And one of the things we really spent a lot of time on was multi-tenant light industrial, and felt that where the economy was changing, it was leading towards this product. We hired a senior executive, Scott Word, who had worked at Legacy, and said, Scott, we're going to back you and us, and let's go buy multi-tenant light industrial. And in the last year, we've bought about $125 million worth of it. We own in Houston, Texas. We own in Nevada, Las Vegas area. We're closing today, I think, on something in Sacramento. We own something in Los Angeles. And we're building out a whole platform there. And the reason we like multi-tenant light industrial, it's kind of value add in the industrial space. It's B plus that we're trying to get to an AA minus. And what it really is I think indicative of the new economy. It's usually 70% of some of these space is warehouse, logistics, and 20 or 30% is office. And, but that really is only about 2,000 square feet of office. Most of it is usually in residential neighborhoods because it was built at a time when it was further out, and then residents have moved in around it. So it's very supply constrained. You're not going to be able to rip it down and build new stuff because people don't, would rather see housing and such. And we also think that given this gig economy we're in, and where people can start a business much easier, this is really in demand because, 10 years ago, a year, 2 years ago, you might have inventory, but that would be out in your warehouse and you put yourself in a big office building because that was your prestige and all that. I think all that's out the window now. I think people are like, I don't need to support an office in a CBD if most of my business is around distribution and logistics. So we really like it. We also, I hate to say it because I'm such a California and Los Angeles person. It's in my blood quite literally. But we really like states like Texas and Nevada and Arizona. And when people ask me about that, I say, look, I love the quality of life where I live, even though it's been affected by homelessness and all that. I love the weather. But the framework we've set in California is not much different what they have in Arizona or they have in Texas. We've just decided that we're going to fee ourselves to death. So like every state has a business license, but is it going to be $100? Is it going to be $10,000 the way California does it?
Yeah.
And, I think you can have a workforce in California that you can pay and all that stuff, but you start looking at all the additional costs. If you have a choice, you're not gonna put your accounting department in California anymore. Why would you if you can put it in Texas or all these? So, I think California the pendulum needs to swing back a little bit because there's so many positives about living here in California, but the negatives when starting a business or running a business are just they're real. And everybody's fooling themselves if they think, no, if Sacramento thinks you can just, let's just add this one more revenue source and get rid of, like the talk was, get rid of Prop 13 on commercial office. What they don't understand is you're just going to drive businesses out because one of the things that people can deal with in California is our property taxes are stable and we can understand what they're going to be.
Right.
You go to Texas, you don't know that. And so that's, your property taxes can swing wildly in Texas.
Yeah.
So if we're going to have public policymakers come in and try to put that into to grab more money and change it, it's only going to get worse. So we really, it's a long-winded way of saying, while we do buy in California, this multi-tenant light industrial, we're really big fans of some other markets. And the great thing about this product is compared to office, it's a lot less complicated to own and operate. And so we move big in that. We're also in the multifamily space, hardest space to be in. We're looking at those same kind of red states. And I'm not saying we're not going to buy office because we will. We like office over the long haul. We just got to get more data and understanding workflows. And my suspicion is we'll be buying office that has consistent cash flow, some more core stuff, which we think we do very well, and in markets where there's business growth.
That's interesting, Chris. So again, you unloaded a lot there. So I wanted to circle back on the acquisitions of this multi-tenant industrial, and I was curious. So when you're considering a new acquisition, can you walk us through what that decision process looks like for you and your team?
Oh, absolutely. So our team, going back to maybe we're a little bit old school in some regards, but our team meets on Mondays from 12 to 2, the acquisitions team does, we bring lunch in and we go through our pipeline. We do that on a weekly basis. We also have an investment committee that meets every 2 weeks. We had one today that approves everything that has gone on. What we're usually doing is taking, hey, we either found this off market or we got an email, and we're working it through our underwriting process from back of the napkin to formal investment committee. When it comes to multi-tenant light industrial, we're very focused on how we're going to capitalize these. And one of the ways that we've done that is we've really jumped into what we would call our putting our friends and family into a platform structure, so that people who like us, who've invested with us, we have a digital relationship with them. We call it the Rising Investor Platform. And we have some LPs in there and some who are GPs, so that we can get deal flow out to them and get feedback and raise capital that way. At the same time, we're talking to all our private equity real estate partners. And so every Monday, if a deal is going through, we're saying, how are we going to capitalize it? Who's talked to Rockwood? Who's talked to Bento Green Oak? Okay, how's it going? And that's kind of our weekly workflow, culminating every 2 weeks into formal approval of things. And I'll say the area we've had some real successes with crowdfunding. And my partner Scott and I kind of looked at each other last March, or a year ago March, and said, something's happening with this BREIT stuff in a big way. Blackstone has come in when 10 years ago, those, the broker dealer network was shunned upon by most real estate investors. Only hucksters did it. Now Blackstone has legitimized it. What's the next step? And we fundamentally believe raising money from the crowd is the next step. So we partnered with Realty Mogul. They did a full LP raise for us on a deal in Las Vegas. We've partnered with CrowdStreet. We've done it where the platforms have done like half the equity, and we raised the other half from our investors. But I really believe, just like all these other changes that have happened, the millennials and the Gen Zs are going to not have brokers. So they're not going to be investing through the broker deal network, and they're going to want to do it directly through a platform. And we see it out there. We see it in the multifamily space. My good friend Keith Wasserman at Gelt has built an entire platform of investors. I see it with a friend of mine, Chris Powers, in Texas with Fort, his company Fort Capital, that has built their own platform. And so we continue to, you'll see more and more from us that, if you'd like to be on the platform, please, register and we'll walk you through it. It's really an accredited investor platform. But I fundamentally believe that younger people are just going to say, I can do this myself, and, I'll be in a few ETFs and I'll do my real estate allocation. Whereas I think the boomers are much more, well, I have a broker who has a plan for me. And that broker is like, well, I can put $10,000 into Blackstone. I've got you diversification. But I don't think the younger generations are going to go for that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I see the way I have a brother who's 15 and a half years younger, same parents and everything. And he's very much a millennial. And I see the way that they operate, and they just want more control, and they want it to be easy. They want it digitized.
Yeah, definitely. So is it you and Scott, Chris, that makes these decisions, or is it a whole committee if you decide you want to purchase a new building? Like, do they come to you and say,
that's a good question.
This is found this multi-tenant, here's what I think. And then do you make the final decision on that? How does that work?
Well, unfortunately, my father's retired and kind of aged out of the business, but he has left the structure for us that he felt very important. He ran 2 public companies, and while the owners of the business are my father, Scott, and myself, we have never been in a situation where the owners of the business overruled the committee. Okay. So the committee is made up of the people who are going to have to be asset managers for this, all the acquisitions, even analysts. We want input from everybody.
Okay.
And I'm not saying it has to be unanimous, but to date, a deal has never gotten so far that it hasn't been unanimous. But we keep very detailed minutes. We would expect any investor would want that from us, so we can see the history of a deal and how it got there. But that's one thing I will say that my father really built into our organization is we act like we are first-class investors. And one of the ways you do it is you have this discipline of when you meet, the notes you take, how decisions are made. You have a whole track record of it, and that's how we do it. So, if we have a 30-year-old analyst who has a view on whether we should be buying an asset, we want to hear it. And when we get to a final, and we want them on record, because we track all the votes.
Yeah.
But we think that's very important.
Okay.
I think my dad was always, how would I say this? He had some partners who didn't always act that way. And it really, he felt, was a detriment to a lot of the investment strategy, because we only, you have one perspective, I have one perspective. And if that's the one that dominates all the time, it's just groupthink, and what's the point of having everybody there? So he really instilled in us that open communication, technology, I have to admit, has been great. I'm in the office Monday through Wednesday religiously. Thursday, I try to have meetings out, and Friday. So today I have to go to another meeting, so I'm working from home, and we use a software called Boardable that tracks the meeting minutes and it's all video. It's recorded. You can record it if you wanted to. And we had a engaged 90-minute investment committee meeting before we're doing this. So technology has helped, because it allows people to still be out on the road seeing stuff, but we don't miss, whether it's the Monday meeting or the every other week investment committee meeting.
So some of those meetings are done virtually, if people
They
have
are,
to, but you prefer everyone to be in person for those meetings.
we prefer it.
Yeah.
I'm less concerned about the investment committee, because Thursdays usually somebody's on the road, so we probably would never have 100%. But what we try to do is say on Mondays, you should be in from 10 to 12, and then if you need to get on an airplane, you do your travel stuff Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And last week I was in Kansas City. I really like Kansas City. We do some property management there, and I did 2 very important meetings of ours, but I did it virtually, because I was in that market.
Yeah. So Chris, when you look at you guys, when you look at your company and your history on paper and Rising Realty and the millions of square feet that you own and the deals you're involved in, obviously it looks beautiful, but I got to imagine, being involved in real estate as long as you have, there's been some horror stories. Not every deal ends up the way you had planned it. And I was wondering if you could share with us a deal or an investment that didn't go well, and what did you learn from that?
Well, that's a very good question. Let me start with, because of the success my father had with his partners, Rob McGuire and Jim Thomas, and then because he went from them to Catellus, which was a major, the company when he took over had a $400 million market cap, and when they sold it to Prologis, it had a $5.8 billion market cap. Because of those things, and then he took over during the great financial crisis. He and I were at McGuire, the REIT. I think people think we're bigger than we are because of these public company experiences and such. But when we started Rising Realty Partners in 2012, really, my dad and I, we had no assets. We put up our GP capital. We partnered with LP Capital to buy Pac Mutual, and then that led to several others. The thing that I would tell people that I have learned is that it's amazing to me how the faces change so often at our LP Capital. And we did a deal, I can only get into part of it, but I want to share it with the group, with a company called Mount Kellett that was founded by a former Goldman Sachs guy. Their first fund was, $700 million. Their second fund was $2 billion, and their third fund was $4 billion. We had great success in their fund one. We had great success. That's where we did Pac Mutual. Then we bought the B of A portfolio. All of that was going really well, or it has gone very well. And then we bought another asset. And then I get a call one day saying, Chris, I have some bad news. Mount Kellett's imploding. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
You guys are a $3 billion third fund. What do you mean you're imploding? Well, we made some bad bets in China and blah, 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 blah. And then they worked out a deal where Fortress came in. And so I'm sitting at the table with all new faces who didn't get into the deal, who really their whole focus was to close out the fund. And we sat there and said, this is the capital commitments. And part of it was to buy a ground lease. They said, that strategy's over.
Wow.
Well, that was the strategy, guys.
Yeah.
What do you mean it's over?
Yeah.
Well, we're not doing it anymore. We can't call that capital anymore. And we'll do the best we can to lease without spending much money. And it just ultimately we had to work out a deal and just get out of it. And that was very painful. And the lesson I took is, boy, you have to be really careful about who you go into business with and don't assume they'll be around forever. And it was one thing to say that the person I dealt with at that firm wouldn't be around forever, because that is absolutely the case. People move all the time. But to go from, hey, we've got this great, I never thought I had to worry about my co-GP partner. I mean, not my co-GP, my LP partner. When I'm the GP, I thought my LP would be just fine. And so that's been a very painful lesson. And when people ask me about it, I said, when I was a kid and I'd watch my dad do stuff, or I'd watch other people, John Cushman, who I worked for and really respected, I didn't appreciate how much they didn't control. Like, I just assumed that they controlled a lot of things out there. And now I'm in the position I am, I realize, no, you don't control anything. You don't control when you drive down the street, whether you're going to make it to the office or to your market or whatever. You just don't control these things. And that's therefore made us, I don't want to say more cautious, because that isn't the right word. It has made us more diligent about our operating procedures and doing things right, like the investment committee. Even though, Scott and I could probably have everybody on a call and be anywhere and not record it, not do that. We don't do that because we got to have these operating procedures in place. And why that's relevant, look at this one deal. Well, I've got to go back and show this new LP 3 years of decisions that were made in investment committees to do things, so that I can back up that this was the business plan. Now, it didn't help, but I was able to do that. And and I also think part of the other reason when we were ready to go on this fund, you got to show a pension fund that all the discipline that you have in your operation. I do like a lot about the technology because it's so easy. I really do. And I think you have access to it. And so, we try to use technology as a force multiplier. That's one of our mantras over and over again. And it allowed us to show things. But I just go back to, you can do all those things and you realize how little control. I have no control over whether people come back to the office in downtown LA. I have zero control of it. And it doesn't mean I'm dumb. It doesn't mean I'm smart. It doesn't whatever. You get way too much credit when you have a home run deal, and probably get too negative of credit when things don't go as well. So I think it's over a career, and what we've seen and why we've pivoted to doing more industrial is there were opportunities and we got to jump on them just the same way we did when we jumped into creative office.
Nice. I like that. I have this leads me to some other questions for you with everything you've just been talking. So one of the things, you kind of touched on it a little bit, and I just wanted to see if there was anything you wanted to add. But when I look at you, or when people look at a company like you, and it seems like you have so many people that you're talking to or answering to, whether it's investors, you have employees. I don't know how many employees, but you have a lot of employees. You have tenants. You have technical issues. You have mechanical issues. You deal with the city a lot by owning big commercial real estate. So how do you stay focused with all of these things coming at you and having to be aware and make decisions on all of these inputs? How do you stay focused?
Let me start with number one. For most of my life, I had a great mentor in my father, and I was always able to bounce things off him. And now at this stage of my life, I have a great partnership with my partner, Scott McMullen. Scott and I knew each other at Duke. He ran HFF on the West Coast and built it up when they had moved from Texas out here. And we have a very yin and yang. And I think that is number one. I can tend to get a little more emotional and passionate about things. Scott's much more by the book. And so when something comes up, we're good at bouncing things off of each other. How do you approach it? I think one of the things I'm very poor at doing, and I think Scott does much better than me, is leaving things, quote unquote, at the office. Like, something goes wrong, it takes me 2 or 3 days to work through it, what my strategy is going to be. And so I don't always do that as well. And I think I struggle with that. I think with my father leaving the business, that's been the biggest struggle, because we would talk 3 times, 4 times a day. I also, as I try to tell people, I just honest, I deal with anxiety just like anybody else does, and I deal with the fact that I feel the weight of, we have about 45 employees, and that we're the reason that they can put food on their table. And I've got investors, and I think for the most part, investors don't take things personally, but sometimes they do. And I think we have big time. Some of our investors will bottle up Sovereign Wealth Fund and state of Oregon. I mean, big time investors, and I don't want to disappoint them. So I deal with a lot of those stresses, and I try to do it because I have a partner to talk to. And I think we give a voice to our people in a way. I mean, we're not a micromanagement shop. I think anybody who's worked for us or works with us knows that we defer a lot to our team, and I think that can help with all of this. But I think I'm kind of getting to a punchline here. Is here I sit at 52 after going to Duke University and playing college football and then doing all these other things. One of the things I've realized is how important it is to have structure in your life and the support you have in your life, and the people around you, because otherwise the weight of all this stuff can be crushing. And I'm very involved with YPO, and I see some people just handle this stuff all so much better. They just can have a positive, let's go have fun attitude all the time. I struggle with that a little bit. I like to think I'm an optimist, but
Yeah.
I don't want to have to. We have an investor on something that is not going the way we want. I fret about that phone call. I think one of the things I've learned is do it the first thing in the morning and get it done. But I struggle with all these things, and I think it's important that everybody recognize that. I think there's a lot of assumptions made just because our name is well known, and that's okay. I probably make a lot of assumptions about other people out there too. But it's a struggle, and you got to be honest about it. I think the worst thing you can do is try to pretend that it's not so. And so hopefully that was a long-winded answer, but hopefully it was an honest answer.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. That everybody, like everybody. I mean, you have some of those real concerns, worries too. So Chris, if you were starting, say, small today, and I know that's so out of your wheelhouse today, but if you could give some advice to, say, younger, newer CRE investor, maybe that doesn't want to invest in a big platform, but maybe wants to start small, trying to do something themselves, what would you recommend?
So here's where I'd start. My dad loves to say, he's been around so long, he's seen things that are never going to happen again and again and again. And the point is, real estate is cyclical. So right now, office is the stepchild. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Industrial's big, apartments are big. And what does that mean? It means cap rates are lower. It's harder to buy there. So if you're a young investor and you're trying to do something in real estate directly or just build a company, I'd be very careful about the flavor of the year for real estate, because it does go in and out. I think you have to have a thesis, and that thesis has to be something different. If I was 25 doing this, I mean, I'll tell you, I would use the SBA loans and try to find a duplex that I could buy with a loan, and just to get me some equity in it. I find it interesting that we have people on our team, and I've worked with people who, while they're in real estate, they're still W-2 workers, and they haven't realized that, no, you want to be an investor. You got to use that money to help you go make an investment, but don't pay income tax if you can avoid it. And I think people are until you make that step in the real estate business, you're not really in the real estate business. You're just working at a corporation, taking a salary plus a bonus the government gets 50% or more of. And so I would encourage people to, when you're young, you don't have kids, or you have kids and they're young, that's where you start to try to buy a small industrial building with some friends. And, instead of taking that a trip down to Cabo or something, pull that money and go buy something that gets you in with equity. Because if you can do that when you're young, you can absorb a loss here or there, but you can also start to really double and triple your money and do 1031. So if the goal is to be an investor, I would find a way to do it. Now, one of the things that has opened up has been this crowdfunding, and I really think that Realty Mogul and CrowdStreet and Fundrise. Well, Fundrise is a little different because they're also an operator, but but the but the fund rises, I mean the Crowd Streets and the Realty Moguls of the world, they're really vetting an operator,
Mm-hmm.
and so if they're willing to take a $25,000 investment as an LP, that's a great vehicle to do it through, to get your feet wet, because you have access to all the property management reports, you have access to all the documents because you're an LP in the deal, and that's a good way to see a deal, and to get started. But this is what I say to a lot of people, and I go, people don't always understand it. I'll tell you, one of the smart things to do is get your real estate license as young as you can, and then as soon as you can, get your broker's license, because that just opens. If you have a broker's license, you can go do deals on your own. You can start your own business, and what it takes to get that. I say this to people all the time, especially if you've gone to law school or you're just out of college. Just buckle down, get those accreditations early in life, because it gives you optionality when someone decides at 30 to get in the business. Well, I've had my real estate license for 8 years. I've my broker's license for 2 years. You're just further along the journey than other people are. And I know people, I get it all the time. Well, I've had a sales license for 30 years. Why would I want a brokerage license? Well, then you're not going to change much. If you're only going with the sales license, you'll never start your own company. You'll never be able to go out on your own. You can't start a property management company. So.
No, that's great advice. That was some really, really good points in there. Thank you on that. So Chris, besides commercial real estate, what else is important to you in your life? And if this is maybe too big of a question, but have you ever thought about your legacy?
Well, I haven't thought much about mine. I think about my father's a lot as he's gotten older. But here's what's important. My family is the most important thing. My wife and 3 children are by far the most important thing. My parents, my brother. I start there because that's just what drives me to do everything that I do, because I want to impress them. I want them to feel secure. I want all of that. So that's number one. Number two, my friends, especially my partner Scott. Those friends are really important. If you get outside of that, one of the things that I'm involved in that means a lot to me is River LA, which is a group of it's a group that is really focused on trying to make that 51-mile LA River a vital part of uniting our city. And there's FOLAR, the friends, that's a little bit more grassroots. They go out and pick the trash up and things like this. We're talking about how do we make that river less of a concrete blight. Not that you got to have concrete in it in a lot of places for flood control, because that's real. But how do we use that 51 miles from Long Beach to Canoga Park, where somebody from Compton can get on it and go up to Disney Studios by riding a bike path? I really think that is a legacy thing, because you can create another coast, really. You have housing and how we deal with our housing needs along the river. So that's been something that's been really important to me. Over the years, I've been very involved in some Catholic causes. I was on the board at Loyola High School for many, many years, for 10 years. So that's important to me. But my father has built a big name. He was campaign manager for Tom Bradley in '73, and was very involved in politics. And Tom was one of his best friends. John Tunney, the former senator, was one of his best friends. Ted Kennedy. So my dad did it on a bigger scale. I'm not that interested in doing some of those things. I'm pretty disheartened, but about the city of Los Angeles and where we're at right now, and the lack of leadership that we have across the city. So I'd love to be supportive in some ways, but I'm also gotten a little cynical when you see what Weezer and some of the others have done to really, just some bad things. So hopefully with this new election, I know Karen Bass, she's really bright woman, and I like her. But I also know Rick Caruso very, very well, and I'm hopeful that Rick will bring a new leadership to the city. But whoever wins this, I think, is determinative on the future of our investments in Los Angeles, and I think the whole city and the county. This new mayor is going to be the most important choice we've had in a generation.
Yeah, definitely. It's a big one, and hopefully the mayor could have some, a little bit more power. They say the mayor doesn't have a lot of power, but I don't know. I guess
There's a
that's
there's a poll, you know, that go in. I think when I look at failure on homeless husband, because you have 15 people, what one wants to do can be different than the other person wants to do in the district. So having a mayor who's out to the fire, I think we need changes in our city. I don't know if Rick or Karen can address that. That's you know, yeah. But I think and it's not Rick or Karen. I mean, I haven't seen any polling lately. But I do know whoever wins, we need leadership in a way we haven't. We need leadership from City Hall. We need someone out there every day, and not defer. Oh, that's the county. Oh, that's the state. No, all of us.
Right.
And you know.
Yeah. No, I agree. And yeah, I agree. I hope Caruso comes in and lays down some hard new rules and leadership. I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Chris,
While I'm a fan of Rick, I will tell you that Karen Bass is a very impressive woman. So I don't want I don't want this to come out and people, oh, you just want the white guy who does what you do there. No, I just want leadership. I want active leadership. And I think of the candidates, I think Rick does that, but it doesn't mean that other people can't do it.
For sure. So just a couple quick questions before we wrap up. And these are two questions I like to ask all of my guests, since we're an LA-based podcast, and a lot of the listeners, majority of the listeners, are really out here in Los Angeles. So two questions, you can answer them in either order. It doesn't matter. But the first is, what is your favorite place or thing to do in Los Angeles? And the second is, if you could ask the listeners to make LA a better place, what would you like to ask them? And you can take those in any order you want.
Well, let me start with the first one. I live in Pasadena, and I grew up in Glendale, and have lived in Manhattan Beach for 8 or 9 years. I've lived in Brentwood and Santa Monica, and I've lived in Pasadena for the last 15 years. I really love the Arroyo Seco, and I walk around the Woods Bowl every day. I love everything about this ecosystem here. Very Mediterranean climate, and so I'm a big fan of the Arroyo Seco in Pasadena. So probably my favorite place. But I will tell you, to get above that, what I really like is that when I start in the morning and I'm going on the trails, or I take my mountain bike and I go up, and then I get out to the beach, and later in the day, and then you maybe go to a game in Dodger Stadium. I mean, what I love is you can do everything here. And I think that's, you just can't. I mean, people forget. I lived in North Carolina, and there's times of the year where the weather just, you can't be outside. It's too hot and humid, and there's too many bugs. And Texas has some of that. So I think it's very unique here in Southern California. What would I like to ask? Give me that question again. It was, what would I like to ask?
If you could ask the listeners to make LA a better place, what would you ask them to do?
Let's not be so cynical. I think we as Los Angelenos have gotten very cynical about our life, the state, the high taxes, all this. Let's be less cynical and let's push for change, because this really is a great place. And the politics they do swing back and forth. And, instead of just rolling our eyes and saying, well, that's LA and that just sucks, or, it's just high tax and we have to live with it. Get engaged. I think, and it doesn't, I think there's an attitude that's come in during COVID that I find disappointing, that is just, well, we'll let the red states take all the businesses and all. It's like almost we give up. Let's be proponents of where we live and where we send our kids to school and where we choose to, a lot of people live and die, and not be cynical about it. And that's what I would hope, because when you really pull away the layers, we have high taxes. Yes, there's homelessness and there's crime. It's still a place that everybody comes to, especially every January 1st for the Rose Bowl. And then you see the Super Bowl, and then you see the World Series, and all these people come here and they go, what an amazing place to live.
Right.
And I just think that we can't be cynical. We got to be really proponents of where we live.
That's a great answer.
I'm just going to throw it out there. My biggest frustration with the LA Times is why aren't we proponents for this community? Why is everything a scandal, and why is everything awful, awful, awful? I want to see people be cheerleaders for this region.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great answer, and that's a great LA answer. Chris, are you an LA native as well, or did you
I am. I was
born and raised?
I was born at Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital.
Oh my God!
I
Oh
was born
gosh,
in Hollywood. So I'm, yeah. And my father came here in 1954. His father was a merchant marine and then was very good with machinery and was the engineer when they built the Statler Hotel. And that's what brought my father here. And so he's been here since 54. My mother's from Fresno. Father was a big car dealer there, but she's been here since since she came to UCLA in 1960. And that's where my parents met. So yeah, I am a born and raised Angelino, and I know the joke is you move here after a week, you're all of a sudden native, but there are those of us who really are natives.
Well, that's great. I am actually a native too, and born and raised second generation, at least on half my side. My dad, they grew up in Boyle Heights, and then he ended up going to LA high school in Mid-City. My mom's from New York, but my dad's whole side of the family, they're all from Los Angeles, and there used to be a lot of Bihars back in Boyle Heights back in the day, but they've all left at this point.
Yeah.
So, hey, Chris, so we've been going for a while. I appreciate your time, and I just want to let people know that Krista has a podcast. You're the host of the Real Market podcast,
Yep.
and they can be found on Apple iTunes. And Chris meets with and interviews some of the biggest names in all aspects of commercial real estate. And I think it's a great show, and would recommend any of my listeners to take a listen to your podcast to get another taste on commercial real estate and go in depth with Chris. And Chris, again, can be found on Twitter at Chris Rising and Instagram, Christopher Rising. And Chris, so before we sign off, is there anything else, any departing words you'd like to share? Or that we missed? I don't know. I don't know if I want to open that up and we go another hour. I think I'll lose some listeners, but maybe because I feel like there are other things we didn't get into, but I do want to be respectful of your time and the listeners' time, and I want them to be able to really hear everything you have to say, because you have so much wealth of knowledge and so much experience, and I think there's so much depth to what you've shared with us, and I think hopefully people really took a listen, maybe even took some notes, and I think there was something for the early investors and definitely some people who are really engaged in commercial real estate as their profession. Hopefully they've picked up on a couple things as well that they can implement with their company or in their life and how they approach real estate. So you shared some really good nuggets with us.
Let me share one very important thing, and I want everyone to listen, who's listening, to really understand this. Anthony, what you do is still one of the most important things in real estate. And I think the role of a broker has evolved and changed. And when you see the big companies, the CBs and the JLLs, and you have a broker who's really just an account manager for a large corporation, it gets lost what you do. And, it's no longer a world where you have your little note cards where that one owner who has that one space. I mean, that world has kind of changed. But somebody who knows their market inside and out, knows the history of the market, has seen businesses come and go, who knows opportunities are coming because they were there 3 years ago and saw that. I mean, it's a dying profession in some respects, but for us, we try to go to markets and find you. Find that person who can give us the history. And if I was going to, you provide so much. I think the listeners need to understand that, because I think what a broker does today gets lost a little bit. And the way that you're able to have a career of being a part of transactions because you're adding value is extraordinary. I'll leave it with this story. My father used to love to say, 3 people outside his office. There's a banker, there's the lawyer, and there's the broker who might have a tenant. He meets with the broker first all the time.
I love that. Thank you so much for that, for sharing that. I really appreciate that. So that's great, Chris. Okay, well, we will pick it up. Everybody listen to The Real Market, and Chris, this will be out in a couple weeks. So everybody, thank you so much. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back with other great guests down the road. Thank you.